Good afternoon, everybody. Right, I can see some yawns and some food comas setting in. Now, I have to apologize, I don't have any Top Gun clips. I think if I had, I'd probably have slightly more people in the room. But I am going to start with an interactive survey to try and break those food comas up. So, can everyone that's in the room stand up? Everyone stand up? That includes everyone over there. Stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up.
Do we, sir?
They can sit down because...
No, you just called me out.
Okay, yeah, we'll stand up, we'll stand up. All right, so, stay standing up if you consider data to be one of the most valuable or the most valuable commodity in your end customers today. If you sit down, then you probably should go else. Right. Now, stay standing up, though, if you've ever actually gone and proactively asked your customer what is their enterprise data strategy. All of you? Fantastic. Then this is going to be a very good talk. You're in the right place. Good. Well, normally, you can all sit down now, by the way. Thank you very much. So more often than not, lots of people sit down. And there was quite a bit of sitting down in that one as well, so I'm going to sort of take that as a successful start to my speech, despite the fact it probably wasn't. But the reason that a lot of people don't ask the question, or if they do ask the question, they don't follow up correctly or they don't make it work, is because analytics is really difficult. Data intelligence is really difficult. Gleaning value and insight from data to drive business decisions, to drive business change is really difficult. But at Arrow, obviously, our job is to try and help you guys to do more and go and sort of have these conversations and feel safe and secure in the conversations you're having. So, we came up with a way of breaking data intelligence opportunities down into manageable chunks. We call it, and it's the name of this presentation, the Ingest, Transform, Store, and Explore strategy. So to make it very, very simple, and it's going to be the framework of our conversation, Ingest is all about how you get the data in. What type of data do you want to use to be able to gather and glean the best possible results? Transform is all about what you do to the data to transform it from raw data into information. How do you combine it? How do you correlate it? How do you apply the algorithms to really drive that competitive advantage out of your data? Store is all about how do you actually have it at rest? How do you apply governance, legislation? How do you make sure that it's not at risk? And how do you make sure that it's available to the vast quantity of end users that need it? And Explore is all about how you explore the data, visualization, representation as APIs, and how you actually get the value out or extract the value from all the hard work from the previous 3 steps to actually deliver that genuine result to the widest possible cohort of your organization. So to talk with me today about those 4 steps, I have Paul from IBM and Sean from HDS, oh, not HDS, sorry, Hitachi. If you'd like to introduce yourselves, chaps.
Yeah, I'm Paul Zakopoulos. I think I know some of the Arrow folks after all these years, but I run the cognitive systems business, and I've been in the big data analytics game for probably 23 years. So my whole entire life's work has been data, and it's become enormously cool in the last 2 years. I'd say that's it. Up until then, it was geeky, but from now on, it's pretty hot topic right now.
Absolutely.
Right, and I'm Sean Rosemary, and I'm the SVP and CTO for Hitachi Vantara. And ultimately, I look after all of technical sales around the world. But I'm also at the cusp of the build-out of our vertical businesses, the businesses that are really taking the concepts of IT, merging them with OT, operational technology, and actually building out this next generation of solutions where data solves problems in specific industries, financial services, healthcare, energy, manufacturing, and beyond, obviously industrial as well. So with that said, really exciting time to be here, and thank you all for making the time to listen to us. So David, back to you.
Fantastic. So chaps, let's start at the top in ingestion. So obviously the start of any analytical system is understanding the types of data you need. And then obviously the types of data are directly linked to the outcome. What trends are you guys seeing in ingestion? What's differed over the last few years in how people are going about actually sourcing and feeling a bit more sort of able to go and get slightly more obscure data sources to really answer the questions better.
Yeah, sure. I mean, let me give you guys a bit of an analogy to start the conversation, which says many of our clients don't think about how they're going to ingest it. It's not a very exciting topic for many of them. They actually think about how can I get more data. And the analogy I would give you is if you think of your eaves trough system or your rain collection system at home, the way water drains from your house, if you don't actually have it working properly, adding more water is going to cause you major issues. It's actually going to flood your basement. And I would say many of our clients today, because they've never dealt with this discussion, they're really enamored by the potential of IoT. They're very enamored by the idea that all these machines or actuators or sensors are going to be able to do all this great value. But at the end of the day, actually adding more data to their environment today will crush them. So to your point on ingestion, the first thing we have to do is just think about where is all this data growth coming from? And ultimately, we've always thought about structured or database. We've done a really good job, right? IBM's done a great job of helping clients to collect and manage that data. But that's not where all the growth is. It's not SAP, it's not Oracle. Most of the growth is coming in unstructured data, productivity, photos, videos, and the rest of that growth is coming from streaming data, whether it's coming from social and the internet or it's coming from machines. The process of ingesting that data is significantly different because we're talking about variety and velocity that we've never seen before, but most importantly, none of that data comes with metadata intact. I have a photo, and if you're like me, I have, 13,000 photos at home? I have no idea what's in any of them. If I start to think about all the photographs, electronic communications, start to think about all the videos you've collected in surveillance, start to think about how do I meta tag it so that when I ingest it, I can effectively search it. And so to your ingest point, I'll kind of kick the ball over to Paul, but I do think we have to think about how do I surround that data that I'm ingesting with enough metadata so it's actually useful for me down the road.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Listen, the ingestion part's the easy part. This is dead easy. We're ingesting more and more data. You talked about, what is it? They always say 80% of the world's data is unstructured. And so those are bringing new kind of things into the decision-making process. But before you can get them decisioning, they have to land somewhere, right? And they land ungoverned, and that's probably going to be the next phase we're going to talk about. If I was to give everybody in this room a grade on data collection, ingestion, I'd give you an A+. If you're not an A+ in that, it's because you don't want to be. It's too easy to get data today. It's absolutely dead simple, which means that your data acquisition curve is about sloped like that. What you need to ask yourself for all the stages that we're going to get into next, which is, so you get A+ on that, what's your score on data understanding? It's probably like this. And you think about your personal lives when you work on your laptops and you're typing in something in Microsoft Word or an Outlook and you spell something wrong and it's a squiggly line. That's 24/7 decisioning. But we suck at 24/7 decisioning. Every person in this room, your clients are not doing a good job at 24/7 decisioning. Few people can do that. You get a C-. And so what happens when you get an A+ on data collection and your decisioning curve is like this? This gets bigger and bigger. And being polite, I'd say this is the opportunity cost of not knowing. Being serious, I'd say for your clients, they're getting dumber and dumber about their business. Absolutely dumber and dumber about their business as time goes on. So if they're not leading at the front with an analytics strategy, which goes all the way back to the moment that data lands on how to tag it and then move it through the different processes we'll talk about, you're going to get stuck. And that's the advantage.
Yeah. And obviously into that, once as you start to gain more data, as you start to tag it, then you have to make sure that you are collecting it and you are applying governance and legislation as it comes in. And I think this is one of the places where I've seen a lot of end customers fall down, is that they go through the first two stages and they don't really think about how the governance and the sort of audit trail of the data until it's at rest. Whereas actually you need to think about how you apply corporate governance and how you apply auditability and all those sorts of things right at the start.
Yeah. So, I always have this argument with my daughter because her room's never clean. She's 13. And I always tell her, you have to be in your room to clean your room, right? And you think about this messy room and how could you find anything in there? I mean, that's what data governance is really like. And so you have to think about, how do I attach lineage? So when I ask Chloe to clean her room, she does what I call the least effort to comply, right? Everything gets put right and it's good enough, right? That's the way everyone's approaching governance. It's like, I don't want to get, now with GDPR, I don't want to get fined, or,
Right.
oh, the CISO says I have to do this. It's like some mandatory training I get at IBM. They give me some corporate training on business conduct guidelines,
Yep.
on not to lie in a kind, and like you go through this, it's just like, yes, 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 yes. There is a big opportunity to move your clients and challenge them to get them to think about how data governance accelerates the path to AI. It absolutely does. Because at the end of the day, when you come to the end and there's an algorithm, you're going to want what we call explainability. That is the next big wave to hit AI. Where did this data come from? What was its lineage, its provenance? What did we do to this data? How was it tagged? All those are good for analytic purposes. They're also good for compliance purposes, and GDPR are things that we'll see come into North America as we see more and more bad actors in taking advantage of your data. But even if it wasn't for that, that is the most misunderstood leg up that your clients can get on their data. And that is to have a governance strategy up front, not after the fact.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'll bridge to Paul's point. Look, at the end of the day, we tend to think about governance as a data center, because that's where the majority of the data lies. Now, let's just very quickly run through history. We went from a single data center to multi-data center when we started doing co-location. Then we went to public cloud. We're there today. We're moving to multi-cloud, and then we'll move to the edge. We'll essentially have mini clouds, which will be our edge devices, and we'll be running applications and data through there. If I don't get my house in order in my data center in terms of how am I governing the data that's there, how am I making sure that as soon as that data is written and matches particular qualifications or particular elements of its PII data or its social security data, as soon as it's written, I automate the action to encrypt, to move, to delete, to protect. If I get that intact in my data center, then I can take that strategy that's working for me, I can extend it to my public cloud players. Take the same governance strategy, extend it out. Well, hey, that's actually really useful, because now I don't have to go inherit Amazon strategy, Google strategy, Azure strategy, try to figure out how to make all this work. And then as I extend to the edge, I now have a scalable strategy that takes me out there. But that's the beauty of where we're headed, is if you get your room clean, now you're in a position to say, great, now I'm ready to extend that data strategy outwards. But if instead everything is shadow IT and each individual line of business is building their application with their governance strategy and their compliance strategy, I can tell you down the road, there will be no way for you to prove compliance across the business, and you will be lost.
And you talked about the hybridity of data analytics and gravity of analytics, and you'll see that into on-premise and cloud. I think that the other opportunity it gives you is not just to accelerate your analytics, but to remove fear, right? It's probably one of the smarter things you can do to understand some clients are held back because they have data behind their firewall. They could take advantage of public cloud for certain aspects of that data, and they can't because they don't understand it. They don't want to, they're stuck in fear. So understanding where the data goes, all of a sudden you have a placement strategy. This data sits behind the firewall. This we can put in public cloud. We can execute APIs from Azure or IBM or whomever to go and analyze that data because we're comfortable. You can't do that if you're not sure what you're dealing with.
No,
that's the number one miss that I see with clients on an analytics journey. And the perfect example is Hadoop. Like, I look at all the Hadoop projects that I've seen around the banks, and you go ask line of business how much value they're getting at it, it's next to nil, because they didn't do it with a data strategy, a data governance strategy. And at the end of the day, big data without analytics it's just a bunch of data.
Yeah, especially in Hadoop, that was a big afterthought was data
Huge.
governance, which is a real shame. So, moving into Transform then. IDC predicts that 70% of all the Fortune 500 will start to implement AI of some shape or form in the next 12 months. What are some of the big things that enterprises should be looking for, not just the Fortune 500, but anyone looking to implement sort of AI, machine learning, deep learning? What are some of the lessons and the things you've seen, the pros, the cons, the sort of the lessons you've learned?
Yeah, let me take one baby step back, and then
Yep,
I'm going to get
please
to your
do.
question. So, the appeal of artificial intelligence, right, or intelligent automation, it's huge. And there are specific cases today where there is enough data for us to essentially build that AI today. But at the end of the day, let's be really, really clear that artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, there's really two components. You've got the brain that has to learn, and you're even seeing analogies today of the brain as at a kindergarten level, it's at an elementary school level, it's at a high school level, as it learns, as it gets trained. And then you have the automation aspect that says once the brain says to go do something, it needs a body to actually go do it, a digital body in this case. That's what gets us to AI and machine learning. But here's what I have you think about. Today, when something happens, a human takes an action. Whether it's a risk issue, a compliance issue, whether it's a positive revenue opportunity, a human does something. And the reality is, the biggest kind of gap there is, I need to capture what has occurred. I need to now know that every time this happens, I take this action. At some point, the human population gets comfortable saying, hey, 99% of the time that happened, you take this action. Let's actually train the system to go do that automatically. That will be a gap for some of us that have been doing this on a manual basis for a very long time. And then over time, the system will start to actually take all of those learnings and be able to create simulations for things that have never happened. Actually teach itself what you saw with the Go when they went and beat the Go game, the fact that it could play billions of games of Go in a week, right? Being able to simulate things at a rate that humans never could. But today, the onus is on us to really sort of think about what is it that happens and how do we react? And how do we capture our action against a particular event, programmatize it so that it becomes a base library on which to learn. And then we open up the possibility to take that base and really extend it out into the future.
Yeah, I think when I hear about AI, first, half the people say that they're doing AI are not doing AI.
No.
I mean, even your Apple phone and Siri, it's not AI. It's not learning. It's not detecting patterns on what I do or anything like that. So
You sure about that?
what's that? Yeah, at least for now. But I think the first thing is know where to start. You don't have to step up into your AI baseball game and hit a home run. And that's what people try to do all the time. Go and get on first base. Just get started. Take the data you have. I'll talk about that in my session. Actually, I think that follows here, that lift, shift, rift or cliff session. But get started there. Here's the bottom line. If a human could do it with the data they have, and it would just take them a long time to get it done, whether it's observe a pattern, or whether it's a adjuster for an insurance company looking at a claim to see if it's over $1,000 or not on front end right bumper damage, then a computer can do really, really well at it, and you can train it to do well. That's the place to start, folks. And if a human doesn't have the data to solve the problem, a computer won't be able to solve the problem without the data. So that problem domain exists in every one of your clients today. They all have tons of, some of it, that data is probably not even digitized. That's the place to start with AI, and then go down either a pattern recognition or a computer vision side.
So David, let me expand on the blend, because I think it's really, really crucial.
Please do.
We talked about the data estate. We talked about structured, unstructured, streaming. Let me give you a real scenario. Let's just take an industrial use case just to sort of prove a point. When I buy the train, I put the record of the train in Oracle. I actually do all the maintenance in some sort of relational database context. Now I've got sensors on the train that are actually looking at the temperature, the pressure, the vibration, the bearing, life, and all that's happening in streaming. I've also got a whole bunch of video footage that's happening. It's actually capturing the train as it goes down the track. Is it actually following a linear progression? I've got pictures as the train comes into the station of the key components that I'm reading. I can tell you today that the process of blending that data, integrating it, to actually know that that sensor is on that train, that is that Oracle record, that had that piece of maintenance done, that is where most big data projects are getting hung up today, is the amount of manual effort to go and script this application, this data source to talk to that data source. I can tell you at Hitachi, the reality is, the real complexity of the problem is it's not just a platform play. If you don't understand the train business, you don't have the intelligence to understand how those systems interoperate. Mm-hmm. So the real beauty when we talk about blend is there's another blend to keep in mind, which is all this great IT stuff that we spend the time thinking about. But over here's the OT stuff. I know a lot of you are very specialist experts in particular industries. Your generation is here, and it's now. Because I can tell you, if you don't understand the operational technology and how those businesses run, you cannot connect the data.
Yeah, that comes down to a point that I've seen time and time and time again that says the quality of the data and the quality of the subject matter expert that's actually working with the data is more important than the data scientist to tune the model and then refine the model. You get a much better percentage increase in accuracy by having a more accurate domain expert building the model rather than someone purely mathematically tuning the model.
Well, that's the biggest problem we have right now is that data science and stuff is held for the privileged few, and it needs to be democratized for the many. And you've got 80% of a data scientist's time is spent on integrating the data and data wrangling, connecting the dots that you had just talked about. And line of business is left on the outskirts. Data science is a team sport. That's what I'll tell you. And so one of the most successful strategies you can drive is to make it that, and to bring in line of business, not just to drive the use case, but to be active participants. For example, in labeling the data, everything you just talked about on a railway, and you could add, that was the unstructured data, right? You could even add, look at BNSF Railway. How do they spot a cracked wheel? They listen to it. So it's actually mixing acoustics and video, what was the weather, and all that kind of stuff together. Grabbing train engineers that can start to label things. Here's a wheel that we found a crack. They label it. They know the domain expertise. That is what will separate AI projects that go on this trajectory versus the one that go on that trajectory, for sure.
Yeah, think about, I'll give you guys another really interesting example. I mean, one of the things I always try to do when I talk about this stuff is it's great to show business benefit, but can you show benefit to society as a whole? Think about oil platforms. We need them because we're still very much in this case and age, we're dependent on oil. Oil's harder to get to. Most of it's very deep, and you have to have offshore platforms. The problem is when an offshore oil platform catches on fire, it's a big problem. We refer to critical projects as a burning platform, but these are really burning platforms. And the reality is there's no effective way to get people off of these oil platforms when they catch on fire. So when you start to think about it, the reality is, wow, this is a really interesting problem. I can use video, I can use streaming analytics, I can use the data I have on the rig, I can use streaming data from weather. I can actually start to connect this and blend this. I can predict that there is a high likelihood of an event and buy myself time. But once again, I need to understand the OT aspects of the oil business. What systems do I have to shut down? How do I actually enable, like what kind of metrics am I looking at that I can even get seismically within the oceans, within the foundations? How do I connect that to things that have to happen so that not only do I get my people saved, but I don't have a major environmental event? This is the age of operational technology expertise. And if you are a specialist in your business, my advice to you is maintain your specialty. Yeah. Because you will be differentiated on the basis of your OT knowledge, in addition to your ability to leverage common platforms and IT to deliver out the end outcome.
Yeah. I must admit, if I had to go and start a company tomorrow, I would absolutely go and grab domain experts in spaces and build essentially training data and then monetize it. Because I think that's going to be a real industry going forward, will be this data brokerage of just experts that have no idea about machine learning, no idea about AI, but everything about a specific domain are able to tag and identify data so that you can have a super accurate amount of information. So it brings me on to another topic around data, which is synthetic data. So obviously we've spoken a lot about how you'd create and sort of what are your feelings on synthetic data? It's one of these topics that's come up quite a few times recently in certain conferences I've been at. People rave about it, people hate it. It seems to be a very sort of polarizing conversation. Do we have any opinions on that?
I don't know what it is.
So synthetic data.
So I don't. Does anyone know what
it's data that's synthetic.
Exactly. So basically, you would take a really, really small set of accurate data, and then you'd use another AI, a sort of an adversarial neural network, to generate a whole bunch of fake data to the point where you've actually got enough data to then train a proper neural network. Don't worry, we'll park that one for now.
So, no, you know what? Well, here, I'll tell you that. So you can. So a generative adversarial network is when you take, what he's talking about is how do I fool AI, right? And so how do we figure how people will crack our AI codes? As more and more of our world gets driven by AI, you have to make them defensible, right? So security takes a whole new aspect. It wasn't probably the angle that we were going to go down, but that's another thing you guys should start to think about. Like I could take a picture of a stop sign that an autonomous vehicle to recognize the stop sign and stop, and change a couple of pixels on that stop sign, and it would no longer recognize it as a stop sign. Think about counterfeit money, counterfeit buttons on a Louis Vuitton purse. These are all use cases for what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so there, and when you're, I guess, synthetic is, and it's funny, I've never heard the term, and I'm in that business, but
maybe it's a European thing.
No, yeah, but where you have your AI and it's training off this, and then now you create another AI agent that trains against it. It's like good cop, bad cop, and they go back at each other. And I didn't bring it with me, or I would have shown it in my session, but where they start to, I take a piece of a dollar bill from the US and a piece of $1 bill with a guy from Mad Magazine on it, Alfred E. Newman, and they fight against each other to start making a real dollar bill, and they start to learn.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's really about the defensibility of the algorithm you put out there. That'll be a key topic. But
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, you think about good cop, bad cop, almost like to your Mad Magazine, spy versus spy, right? The white spy and the black spy. Maybe I'm aging myself. But at the end of the day, if you think about where this all goes, right, it is going to be your ability to learn. And if you think about blockchain, same idea, right? I mean, the block that is actually deemed to be the correct in the chain is the one that is actually in existence across the highest number of mining chains. So now you say, okay, well, to counterfeit and beat the system, I have to actually have more people writing the invalid block than the actual all of the miners worldwide. It's a fundamental construct of blockchain. But AI is the same concept. It's we need to make sure that whatever conclusion we've built is defensible. No different than if I have a bad teacher train a human, the human's going to do the thing wrong. And I don't know, to your synthetic data point, I do think there's a coming or looming aspect of says, who's going to certify a data set before it is actually approved for consumption by an AI machine? And that will be a very interesting era for us, is who actually validates that this data is correct and ethical and has integrity and can actually be used in these models. I don't think we're there yet.
And I think a takeaway from that is just the dynamics or the scope of security that you'll consult your clients on is going to change. One from an ethics and the behavior of the algorithm, which is explainability from governance, and the other is from hackers. There will be new types of hacking, right? Like how we hack websites today with a SQL injection. This will be different. You'll hack it by manipulating pictures that the algorithm is seeing and classifying. So I think that's the best part that comes out of there, is to understand there are these new threat vectors that come. It's all a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah, and I think we're already starting to see viruses that are built and learn and can fool and genuinely sort of get past systems by acting like the users that they're sort of mirroring. Brilliant, thanks guys, really appreciate that. That's good. I must admit, one of the nice things about this particular talk is you'll never find a more philosophical and sort of ethical discussion in a technology summit, I don't think, ever. That's the fun of AI. So, moving swiftly on to store. Now, store, it's been there forever. It's essentially where we reside the data. But I think more than ever, with things like GDPR, obviously the European legislation around data privacy, but then all of the sort of verticalized data security requirements of varying different industries in North America, I think store is something that people probably overlook because they're very proud that they've got the data in. They're even prouder they've transformed it into some amazing information, then put it in a database and kind of forget about it. So sort of where do you get, what advice would you give to a company to how to store their data in a meaningful, compliant way?
Yeah, so let's talk about that, right? I mean, the beauty for everybody in this room is I want to be really clear. There's high strategic elements like AI, there's high strategic elements like IoT. Every one of these projects that we're talking about, first of all, is an analytics project. There's a lot of money being spent there, so you can monetize that quickly. By the way, every analytics project is a data enrichment project, and there's even more money being spent there. At ingestion, how do I enrich? And every enrichment project is actually a storage project, because at the end of the day, whether we call it storageless, serverless, whatever there are servers and there is storage. Your customers just may not own it. But the reality is it's there. And when I talk to clients, it's kind of gotten really interesting because, we tend to chase all these features, right? I need that, I need this, I need dedupe, I need compression, I need this rates. But at the end of the day, I ask them one question, like, what's the resiliency level of the data? How important is it that this data remains intact? It really comes down, RPO, RTO. Good. You're going to choose your provider on the basis of the resilient profile that you need for your data. But here's where the real interesting opportunity is. It's not backup and it's not DR, because we solved that in Y2K because we were all scared to death it was going to kill us. By the way, nobody's really updated it since Y2K. But where the looming opportunity is in what I'll call copy data management. So as we talk about everything we did today, you know what's happening? The request for IT to clone a data set is up 10 to 50 times what it was a few years ago. More and more business executives are asking for copies of data that is sitting somewhere in the data center, somewhere on the cloud, so that they can go and build their next project. The problem is I make the copies and then I never track where they go. I don't actually know where that data is. And when I start to think about how do I automate that process, I don't want IT getting sucked in making copies because that takes a lot of people. I need to track the copies and know where they are, so if I actually have to recall one, I know exactly where it is. And number three, I have to always track the data profile of what has been copied, because if at any point the governance laws change, I need to know that that copy's out there and fits that profile. That copy data management area is an enormous opportunity. And I think it really takes us to this concept of where is storage? Still critical, still growing faster than it ever did. I think the storage market last year grew about 17%. After everybody said 100% of the data center was moving to the cloud. The opportunity now is not only how do I protect that data, how do I automate the copies of that data so I can feed it, so I can start to move it to AI models, I can start to move it to data integration, etc.
Yeah, I'll take a different angle on that complements. So you had talked about some of the governance, but the actual infrastructure architecture that you'll be advising clients on or where clients want to go. I think one of the biggest one is the object store. So it's a different method of storage. Started in the cloud, now you see it on private or behind the firewall. The reason is it's an opportunity. It's got way better life dynamics. If the data needs to live forever, that's where it will live. I also think, by the way, in the coming years, you're going to see tape make a huge resurgence, new types of tape technologies coming to market. The bottom line is there's all kinds of storage. There's object store, you've got your traditional store, there's SSD, there's tape and those types of things, and they're all fronted in. Maybe it's Hadoop, maybe it's here. What I see a lot of clients doing is wanting to bypass database layers and going direct to object store. They'll want to take a SQL API and query it. So if you've seen IBM has a service for that, Amazon Athena, if you've heard of that. And the reason is, if you think about it, I just come in there and I start asking these questions, and the performance is going to go down on object store than it would in a database. But I'm okay with that because I'm exploring. And I think what I'm getting at here is object store is a hot technology that I'm not sure if everyone's aware of. You should be aware of that. And then when you go to advise your clients, I think you want to advise them on performance tiers. I think you really need to have this gold, silver, bronze, or platinum level performance tiers. And when you make a copy, you don't make a copy so someone kind of spins off some little piece of it unless they have to, but you make a copy because it's a high performance tier. Because right now, putting something in an in-memory columnar like a DB2 Blue or an SAP HANA warehouse is always going to run faster than any alternatives right now, right? And when you go and you offload out of a warehouse to SQL because you're trying to save on some spinning cycles and costs, it's always going to perform not as quickly as it's going to in a database. And when you go to object store, it's not going to perform as quick. So I think the storage strategy should be, one is it's this diverse, ubiquitous market. There's all types of storage technologies. You will virtualize over that so lines of business and developers can access them without really giving anything about any care to where they are. And that's where the whole governance thing comes back. As a business user, I don't care whether that table is sitting in Teradata or in Netezza or Oracle, or whether it just got rolled off into cold archive on Hadoop. I shouldn't care. I just look at the business object with the metadata tagging and go after it. So performance tier and the metadata on top of that abstracts where it lives. You shouldn't care where the storage lives outside of the architecture.
Absolutely, and I really couldn't agree more with you about tape. I think tape is going to be a really big technology, especially as we can start to read and write it faster. And the tapes, I don't know where we're up to now with the latest LTO, but it's just crackers. So
I was giving you a big wink on some announcements coming from IBM, by the way, when I brought up tape. But yeah, it's hot. It's hot.
Shameless plug, but that's what we're here for. So continue on that sort of vein of where to store the data. Obviously, I think one of the other confusing points in the store bit of the strategy is what you or how you should advise, or at what point certain technologies are appropriate. You know, so we've got data lakes, object stores, NoSQL, SQL, enterprise data warehouses, data marts. Yeah, I suppose there's one easy question, there's one easy answer to this, which is just don't worry about it because actually it'll fall out in the mix. But what would be your advice as to organizations and where they should look, and at what point is what technology appropriate to them?
Yeah, it's if I think about where this all ends up, let me sort of give you the aspirational vision and we'll talk about today. Remember that as I move to AI and I move to immediate actions that actually drive, the faster I can take the action on a particular piece of data, whether it's increased revenue, lower cost, lower risk, the faster I can take the action, potentially the higher benefit. So what I want to do is I actually have to move a lot of this intelligence to the edge. And what I can start to do is I can start to take not just my smart machines, but let's just take the gateway within a factory, or the gateway within a hospital. And I can actually have all the data from that particular site feeding into that gateway. Well, now I have a whole different storage topology. Now I'm actually going to be looking at the bits and saying, okay, temperature 60, 60, 60, 60. I can throw away all the other 60s. I'm only going to actually select and store when it changes. But in addition to that, I can actually analyze the data at the edge. I can take the automation at the edge, never leaving that particular gateway. Now, after a certain amount of data has been collected, I'm probably going to throw it back to the core, because now I'm going to look at what's happening holistically across all my sites, all my hospitals, all my areas. And then once again, after I've taken the actions at that level, then I'm going to probably throw it back to the cloud. I'm going to store a copy of the data in the cloud. To Paul's point, at the edge, I need it really, really fast. At the core, I probably need it maybe a little bit slower because I'm taking an action that is more of an aggregation of data. And then what's sitting in the cloud, I'm going to go explore. I want to now look for trends that I may not have seen before. I want to better learn and train my systems. So think about what that means in terms of the opportunity today to look at new architectures that sit at the edge, right? These micro clouds I talked about earlier. Think about what the core is going to look like in terms of the aggregation of all of this data that's happening at sites. And then think about now what happens with the cloud. And I'll point you to the Andreessen paper from probably 18 months ago. Andreessen Horowitz wrote a paper that said the death of the cloud. Now, it's not nearly that dire, so please don't worry about Jeff Bezos. He'll be okay. But what it basically talks about is the fact that we thought everything would move to the public cloud. But the reality is, as we actually get closer to analytics and AI, the systems will have to be, the latency and the bandwidth is not there in the near future. We have to move it closer to the edge. And the edge, by definition, will be in the facility, in the site. Might be managed, but a very different architecture than the current public cloud.
Yeah, in other words, we don't want to bring the data to the analytics. We want to push the analytics down to the data. We call that data gravity. Since you talked about kind of the outside and the edge, I'll talk about the core and the infrastructure. Listen, there is, there are so many choices right now. I think the one thing I would run away from is any technology vendor who's trying to convince you that one technology rules them all.
Yep.
And we heard that. We heard that during the Hadoop wars for sure, right? Hadoop was going to everything. And what is Hadoop? I mean, I wrote the book Hadoop for Dummies, and I'll tell you, I don't know if I would put Hadoop into an infrastructure brand new from now. I might be looking at object store, Spark over object store directly. Right? And then, but then there's examples where Hadoop works great, right? So I think you've got to be open and understand that there's multiple technologies. The biggest mistake you can make is to think we're going to throw all this away and we're just going to go at that one. Any vendor who's selling that is not consulting. They're just trying to sell some SKU number. And by the way, if that's an IBM seller, then say that to the IBM seller. Don't start doing that kind of stuff, right? So you should have a good understanding of what that landscape of polyglot is, and then look at the genre of technology for what you're trying to do. You're trying to store data that's going to feed your neural network. So you're going to have a very flat economies of scale in terms of storage, right? At one point, Hadoop was the new tape. What's the speed to go and feed the neural network to train it? That's your AI side, but you've got a digital transformation strategy. That's going to be fronted in a NoSQL genre like the document database like MongoDB or Cloudant, right? You're probably going to be looking at how do I work web lookups and catalogs. That's a key value store like Redis in memory and those. And the new emerging place, which I actually don't have, I'm just starting to get experience, is around graph databases, which I think are the next big thing. They're the fastest growing market in NoSQL. So there's the traditional stuff, you know. So I just rhymed off 5 or 6 types of kind of compute storage technologies, like how you interface with that stuff. Get to understand them, and then you can consult the right way on them.
Yeah, David, just let me add one thing.
Yeah, please do.
So when we talked about the industry verticals, let me bring back one point. Paul just touched on the complexity of this new world, right? We were all used to kind of 3-tier architectures, web application, database. It's infinitely complex. I have structured, unstructured, streaming, I have technologies for each, and then I've got this whole edge to cloud that I got to manage. Here's my advice to you, though. What your clients are looking for is not pet projects. They're looking for use cases that actually show value in a short period of time, and ideally that someone else has already implemented. So when you start to think about the cores, the architectures that you're going to build, the architectures that you're going to stamp out, think about focusing on the ones and investing in those that are repeatable and deliver value today.
Wow, mini clap. Thank you very much.
I never know.
That's the first
Sometimes
time
they have
that's happened.
AirPods in and they're listening to like a sports game or something. Was that for us? Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
So just think about the fact that you're essentially stamping out architectures, and they're going to be slightly different. But if you build one for an energy company, there's another energy company right around the corner that has the exact same issue. I'll just give you one very high-level example that's just today. So we work with a lot of stock exchanges. And I can tell you in the stock exchange business, it's trading fees. That's how they make their money. They essentially pass paper through, and it's an interesting business. They make a lot of money moving paper between themselves. But at the end of the day, there is a looming business for them, which is they spend a ton of money on analyst data. Analysts who look at the trends of the market and the ratings of the stocks. But what they've now started to say is they actually have their own interpretations of where the market's going based on the analytics of what's happening in their market. But if they can anonymize and aggregate that data, they actually can give better predictions as to where things are going than the own data they buy today. So when they came to us with that particular scenario, we solved it for one stock exchange. Immediately, the other 30 stock exchanges around the world are like, we're trying to do the same thing. By the way, we're going to buy it from ourselves, and we're actually going to be spending less money on the research we buy today. So you think about this example of a use case, highly repeatable, probably 15% that had to be modified, but you built it once and you rolled the same blueprint and the same architecture across the industry.
Fantastic. So, moving swiftly on, let's move on to exploration. So, exploring the data or sort of putting the data into another place, so be it actually a visualization tool or an API to sort of expose it elsewhere. I think if we think about the sort of the visualization tooling and that sort of broad range of bits of technology that exists today, they're all trying to essentially democratize access to the data and be able to open up all that hard work we've done to this point to the widest possible group of individuals, the largest possible cohort. But what is needed? What organizations, what should they be looking for to actually figure out what a good tool is to go and actually get the best value out of all the hard work they've done to this point?
Well, I think it goes back to what I talked about. How do we democratize access so
Absolutely.
everyone can start to analyze that data? I think some of the problem I have with, and they're all changing, so that's good. Some of the problem I have with the traditional kind of power end user tool is that that user has their own intuitions about that data and their bias. And so they lead bias into the discovery with the data sets they pull in. That's the number one problem. If I have a Power Cognos, a Power Tableau user, or some of the Microsoft BI, anything like that. They're so powerful, but their bias comes through. I think you're seeing all those vendors starting to get AI in there at the front, and that's where I think you'll find some pattern detection, whether it be classifications or clustering, to allow people to go and investigate. So that's an emerging space that I think you should be keeping the pulse of the finger on. And the reason is, as each vendor, and they're probably leapfrogging each other, but as they come forward in that area, you'll be able to bring that to your clients. And the message will be more people can participate in this analytics renaissance, if you will. That's the biggest problem. There's not enough participants in the analytics renaissance. So any tool that allows that to happen, I think, is critical.
Yeah.
I would just add one thing to it. I'll take a different tack. If we're not careful, we actually will end up in a world where our data is siloed in a way that will drive tremendous complexity. Today we're actually seeing proprietary data sets being built in proprietary clouds on proprietary platforms. And it puts the client in a very difficult spot because they then have to lock into that cloud if they want to have a centralized data strategy. I do think there's a huge opportunity, and I know a lot of you are key partners out there in the audience. I think there is a huge looming opportunity to say, look, the applications should be built in the cloud. They live incredibly well there. But how do I actually become a data provider? And the reason I think this is so huge for you is what you do is you keep the data in a native format. And regardless of what application or what cloud is accessing it, it actually doesn't become, it doesn't kind of go into its own silo. It doesn't get written to a particular format. It doesn't get compressed. It doesn't get kind of hidden depending on where the app is. The other inherent benefit is as your applications are built, these data providers will be able to do arbitrage on the cost of the lines between the public clouds and themselves. They'll be able to do much more efficiency than an individual client. So just think about this. Where I'm going with it is, okay, you give me flexibility. My data is now accessible. Easy for me to run compliance, to run discovery across my entire data set with less complexity. But now you also have the ability to look at all the additional services you can add on as a provider to all the data that's getting generated. And the more the cloud gets adopted, it actually is all coming back to you. So these are the sort of things I think about, but ultimately to the point on exploring, it's how do I keep the proprietary formats out of my model so that my data is very, very flexible, very agile, and easy to be explored rather than having to be transformed 16 or 60 times before it can be touched.
I think the other thing I'll add just is you should be thinking about how do we decorate that data. So using open data sets, right? So whether that's weather data, garbage collection, policing in a city, crime data, that stuff's all public. Like if you look at city of San Francisco, city of Toronto, where we live, right? There's an enormous amount of data all fronted with an API. I think that's the other next level generation is how do I take that data and mix it with the data I have and put that on the glass with the analysts, and that will kind of add the aperture, if you will, to it. So those are kind of 2 or 3 things to think about in that area.
I must admit as well, I think a lot of people jump straight from nothing to, or from Excel primarily, to a Tableau or a Click. And actually I think there's a lot of innovation going on in this space. I mean, literally whilst I've been here today, yesterday I got introduced to a vendor that's essentially built a chat interface into a database. So you can natural language talk to your database to get queries back. I mean, what a simple way of basically democratizing it so that anyone can run queries against a database without having to understand how to drag items onto a canvas to create a particular visualization. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but I'd say just find what works for you. Don't feel pushed into these complex tools and these, as you say, the Power Cognos, Power BI type users. It doesn't have to be there. So that brings us to the end of our strategy. But because we're much cooler than all the other practices going, we have a quick fire round. So I'm going to ask the guys. It wasn't the briefing notes, so it's not too much of a surprise.
It's never in the briefing.
All right.
So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I want your immediate answer on what your response is to these. So the first one is, what's the most interesting trend for 2018, Sean?
So for me, it's still security.
Security?
First and foremost.
Fantastic. Paul?
I'm going to say blockchain.
Blockchain.
Nothing to do with cryptocurrency. Think of it that way. I will say what the internet did for search, blockchain will do as a trust protocol, and you best get started now on it because when it lands in 2 or 3 years and becomes a ubiquitous trust agent, you'll be either behind the time or you'll be ahead of it. It will put companies out of work and out of business.
Yep.
Again, don't even think about cryptocurrency when I talk about that. Think about trust.
Yeah.
So that's it, trust.
So I should sell my Bitcoin?
What's that?
I should
You
sell
say,
Yeah. Oh, you probably made good money on it, but
So the next is, what is the biggest false horizon in data intelligence? What's the technology or the trend that people are following that you don't think will last, or actually is a bit of a false horizon?
I think people thinking that they need sensors in order to have IoT, and they need to equip every machine to be a smart machine to have IoT. I would actually push clients to say, you have such a richness of data today. The fact that you are not analyzing and leveraging that data, you are losing value daily. Do not wait for the maturity of the gateway strategy and what sensors am I going to put in, when's my machine vendor. We'll get there. There is an unbelievable opportunity today to actually drive real value, revenue creation, cost reduction, risk reduction with the data that you hold. Harness it, become good at it, and then you can go and collect additional data. But I think there's a false horizon that people are waiting for IoT before doing analytics, and that is just completely false.
yeah, because you're just going to do analytics on the IoT data, so
That's
you don't
right.
have that
Precisely.
acumen down. Listen, I'm not going to tell you a technology that I think is a fad because I think technology years are like dog years, right? They expire very quickly. I'll tell you what is a false sense out there. Security. So you said security was the most important thing. Security because of everything connected IoT world. So my toothbrush is connected to the internet. The Nest is connected to the internet. Your car is connected to the internet. These are all attack points. And I'm not sure the last time someone sent you a fix for your connected toothbrush or your car. How do you fix a car today? You have to drive in, and the mechanics take it for an hour and they update the firmware. Meanwhile, you have a connected car at any point that can get attacked, right? Or maybe you go and download a piece of firmware into an SD card, stick into your car. So I think security, feeling that everything's secure, we're all connected, and no one's thinking about that. That to me is the biggest lingering farce of 2018.
I think it's a really good point. So I'm going to chip in on this and be really contentious and say my biggest false horizon is AI.
I was going to say
actually
that.
think AI exists
Yeah.
at the moment. AI is a catch-all term, very much like cloud is now, for machine learning, deep learning, all of those subcategories. But when people, and I think it's been very coined by the media, by the press, AI. So interestingly, each year I write some trends, and I re-badged AI from artificial intelligence to augmented intelligence.
Sure.
Which I think is a much more easy term to get on the right. But yeah, for me, false horizon, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I wouldn't say. See, last year I had an argument with the IoT guy, didn't I?
So I wasn't here,
so
but
we
I have
to have
heard.
one.
I have heard about the.
No, but no, I think actually you're right. If not, maybe you define it. It's overhyped. I would
Yeah.
say that's the biggest thing. I think that we're saying the same
Yeah,
thing. It's not at
absolutely, yeah.
artificial yet. But yeah, AI is the most overhyped thing, but it's the most important thing to get your hands around because the people that are actually doing it are changing the game.
Yep.
Just now everyone's pretending to do it. That's the biggest problem.
Very much so. So where will companies see the best short-term gains from data? If you owned companies, what would you be looking to do first?
Take all the data you have. You already have the data. You kind of hit on it earlier. We call it supervised learning. I'm going to show it in my session, a piece of it. You have the data. You are the opportunity to be the disruptor of tomorrow. Yesterday's disruptor was the FANG stocks and all the folks that you hear about, and the Ubers and those folks. It's actually the people with the data that will rule the world. It's 80% of the data isn't Googleable. It's sitting in your hands. You know that these 10,000 cases you adjudicated were under $2,000 front-end damage, and you guys know this person's not going to pay their credit on time. You're just sitting on that data, doing nothing with it. Feed that into the neural network. That's getting on base in AI. That's real.
Cool.
Yeah, I would tell you, when you're thinking about this opportunity for your respective businesses, think about cost and risk above revenue. I will tell you the business cases, the use cases that we're seeing deployed today with the most success are those that are driving cost reduction and risk reduction. Increased buying, put this in your cart, I can sell you something new, I could open up a new thread. Those are interesting, and I think they're evolving. But I would tell you today, when you look at a company dynamics, it's pretty simple. Margin is is price minus cost. And when you look at price minus cost, there's only two levers. I got to sell more stuff, or I got to bring down the cost of goods sold to actually increase my margin. At the end of the day, the cost, people have brought down the cost of infrastructure and even maybe the cost of OpEx associated with running the infrastructure, but there's still a lot of people doing manual stuff. We talked about it earlier, but if I just bring it down to a very basic level, look at the way a shop floor or data center runs. There are humans taking actions based on alerts that could easily be automated. That is low-hanging fruit. Can you connect the dots and take the action faster? Can you predict when it's going to happen and be there so there's no lag? And more essentially, can I prevent it from ever happening in the first place? That's all possible with the power of analytics and data ingestion today. It's cost reduction, it's risk reduction. And then that gets people comfortable with their data estate. Now they can go off and say, awesome, now could we actually build a better profile of our customer? Could we look to omni-channel and sell them more stuff, sell them more lines of business?
Yeah, I'd walk into each of the CIO or the power sponsor with all your clients, and I'd say, listen, we have two projects we're going to work on, and we'll populate them. Spend money to save money and spend money to make money. And then that's what I would do. That's I do it every time. Every client I talk to, let's talk to you about your spend money to save money opportunities. Some people have been talked into spend money to save money just by removing this or removing that. But you were talking about efficiencies. 100% agree with that. Then you take the money from there and you invest in spend money to make money. Have that conversation with your clients. It resonates. It hunts.
Yeah, it reminds me of the banks, right? Every bank has the same strategy. Strategy 1, fix the bank. Strategy 2, grow the bank. It's the same strategy, just about every organization. Fix it, grow it. When you frame around that, you relate to the business, And then when the business says this is great, we're going to do it, then they go to IT and say, go figure out a way to do it. We tend to sell backwards. We sell to IT, and then IT brings it to the business and architecture, and the business goes, what am I going to do with that? You brought me a solution to a problem I don't have, or something that's not funded. So absolutely, Paul, completely agree.
So what would be your closing words of advice to our gathered channel partners here today?
I'll give you one. I'd say, like, not everyone in this room is an AI expert, I'm going to assume, right? It's new for many of us, right? I kind of started down that journey a year ago. And I would say invest in the power of what I call the power of 1%. So here's the deal. I started this year off with a New Year's resolution to lose 10 pounds. And what we're at, like September, I have 13 to go. So it's not going very good. And I said to my wife, I said, I can't lose any weight traveling all the time. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. And she's like, death by 1,000 cuts has a reciprocal. And you think about the productivity of marginal gains. And if you were to invest 1% every day, if you wanted to lose 10 pounds in a year, this is how easy it is. It sounds hard. This is how easy it is. Take a quarter of an Arrow chocolate bar, 1 square, it's 40 calories. And then every day add 1%. That's a sliver more onto that for 90 days. And then do nothing different for a year. You'll lose 10 pounds. That's your analytics acumen. That's your AI acumen. So many people are so new to this. In my next session, I'll show you some models that I started building. I don't have a computer degree. I just learned how to do it. I just started learning it. Maybe a year now I've been in it. You can get there, invest 1%, because when you do that, you'll go guide your customer. And if you've ever read a book, has anyone ever read a book called The Challenger Sale? Mm-hmm. Right? Must read, right? It's the absolute winner every single time on the 5 types of sellers you'll run into. That's the biggest recommend I'd give for you. Go read The Challenger Sale and then use 1% to be a challenger.
I would tell you guys, I'll bring back the point from earlier and as a point to leave with, which is, when I think about Arrow's business, and I think about the concept of essentially aggregating the best of what's in this room into repeatable solutions that can be sold at scale, this is critically important. This is no longer like a piece of backup software with a piece of storage with some servers. This is a smart factory solution. This is a smart hospital. This is a smart city. Right? This is smart transportation. This is going to require, there is nobody that's going to be able to vertically integrate, and if they do, they'll lose, to deliver these solutions end to end. The partnerships you build, not just with Arrow as the aggregator, but among yourselves, to be able to architect, build, support, manage these environments will be crucial. And some of you will be crucial on the IT side, and some of you will be crucial on the OT side. But remember that it's IT and OT that will actually take us to IoT.
I like it. So I'm going to finish with my own personal takeaway, which is don't be afraid. Okay? I hope you can see from today, we've got a plan, we've got the practice, we've got proven execution and ability to actually take and support our partners in data intelligence opportunities in their end customers. So don't be afraid. Please come talk to us, come work with us, involve us early, and we can genuinely help you to go in and help to make your customers data-driven decision makers and not just sit there, as Paul said, on that mountain of valuable data and not do anything with it. And on that note, I'd like to thank you all for being here. I'd like to thank Paul and Sean for coming on. And have a great rest of your conference. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.